Joining us. And we just got confirmation that what we're going to do, I should say, is something a little different than what we've done in previous years. We're going to, have that breakfast in the morning, and then we're going to follow it by um, a panel discussion with legislative leaders from all the committees of cognizance that we can get in the room, which is going to allow us to hear from them specifically on housing issues and for them to hear from us about our concerns pertaining to housing and housing production, and then have like a robust Q&A with individuals that are in the room. So we're pretty excited about that. We've just started reaching out to legislators. We just got confirmation that Eleni, who is the chair of our Planning and Development Committee, will be joining us, and I'm sure many more will follow. So we're really excited about that.
Yeah, that would be great to have her there. Good.
Hey, Bob, before I get going, I'll let folks in as I see them, but if you have any preliminary comments.
No, I think I'm going to be quiet and let you get right into the bills unless you and Kevin have just a quick overview to give us. But other than that, there's so many bills. I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about anything else.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I will say this, and you can chime in on this, Bob, is that if you read a successful week of lobbying and advocacy on the basis of whom you offend, then we had a banner week this year, or we had a banner week this week. We managed to upset both the DEEP and the DPH because we're going after regs that they're in the process of promulgating, and that would really impact septic systems and how they're regulated in the state of Connecticut. And we've gotten the ear of the majority leader and his staff, and we're in the process of literally heading their regulations off at the pass. And we'll have more to talk about that once we get some legislation out there to talk about. But that has, from what we heard, really irked the DEEP and the DPH because we're stymieing their forward growth on that. And then obviously, with regard to ratio reform for journeyman to apprentice ratios. We've heard from the legislature that the entire legislature was blanketed with a letter, an angrily pointed letter from the IBEW pertaining to our efforts. They have, for 6 years in a row, pretty much been successful in stopping us from even getting a public hearing on the conversation. So they're very angry particularly with Representative Jill Berry, who we're rallying behind for her legislation and for the fact that she's kind of done an end run around the General Law Committee at our request and has put the bill squarely in front of the Commerce Committee, which is much friendlier to our efforts. So that bill is scheduled to have a tentative hearing for February 27th. I know a lot of us are going to be in IBS, but we're expecting to have a big press conference on that bill, and we're really hoping to mobilize members to submit testimony, to come in person if they can, to talk about the challenges that they've had with hiring, contractors that are well staffed to be able to take on the work that you're providing them. So, any quick questions about that before I step into the bills? Bob, anything to add?
Nope.
No.
Nope. I
I
just
think,
love that we're pissing people off. So good job.
yeah. All right, so here we go. We're going to go right from the top. So we're going to monitor this first bill. Where I'm going through right now all the housing bills that have a public hearing on February 18th of next week. We're going to monitor Senate Bill 1302. That's an act prohibiting the eviction of residential tenants for non-payment of rent if the landlord's online rental payment system prevents such payment of rent. And it really does, as the title suggests, So we'll keep an eye on that. Senate Bill 1304, an act prohibiting a landlord from retaliating against a tenant who prevails in a fair rate rent commission proceeding. We're also going to monitor this bill. Tenant is basically protected for 6 months after winning a fair rent proceeding from really from anything. So the commission can order basically a cease and desist if the commission finds that the tenant is or the landlord is unfairly persecuting a tenant for their win in a fair housing court commission. So the next bill is Senate Bill 1305, an act establishing a task force to study municipal penalties for landlords for health and safety violations. The task force is tasked with studying alternatives to monetary penalties to encourage repairs. Again, it's kind of hard to really oppose, task force, so to speak. But we'll keep an eye on this and see how it progresses. Senate Bill 1306, an act eliminating certain funding provisions from the Healthy Homes Fund. We're just going to keep an eye on this. This is really technical language that basically removes dated provisions from the statute that are specific to the town of Hamden. Senate Bill 1307, an act establishing a working group to study and develop best practices to promote housing growth and protect the state's water supply. So this basically establishes a working group to develop best practices for housing growth and protect water supply at the same time. The language is really vague. Just so folks know, this bill was originally put in by Senator Summers at our request after we heard from folks like Matt Gilchrist and Tim Bobrowski about their concerns pertaining to the regional water authorities takeover of Aquarian. So I'm going to testify in person on this bill. What I'm going to do is ask that the language be specific to and really reflect our intentions. I'm going to ask that the working group, think about considering a builder's developer's bill of rights, that they create uniformity, and that there's an opportunity for builder recourse. And I think this is one where if there are some builders that have had particularly egregious experiences with the water utilities, that they may want to submit testimony or come and testify in person on this one. And I'm happy to kind of give folks direction on how to testify and where to submit, et cetera. The next bill.
Jim, can I
Yeah.
jump in on that?
Yep.
I just looked at it. If the focus was how to make sure that the housing growth has adequate water supply, that would be great. But it talks about best practices for housing growth. I seem to remember serving on a task force for 18 months that looked at exactly that. How soon we forget. But it talks about protecting housing growth and water supply as two different things, and then the text of the bill only talks about who's going to be on it, not what it's going to do. So I think it really needs some work, but I like your redirecting of it. So.
Yeah, and I think that the more folks echoing those sentiments, the better. So anyone who's interested in telling a horror story or two about a water company, I think that would be valuable.
So Jim, just real quick though, in Matt, you may want to jump in. We have to make sure we keep our eye on the ball here, because to simply complain about water company abuse, which I think we all could, we have to be careful that the argument then isn't, well, that's why we're trying to make it better with this consolidation kind of thing. We have to make sure we're attacking it for the right reasons and we should all be together on that same messaging.
I mean, there's a couple of points here. You're exactly right. One is, RWA is going to get too big, and Pura does not get to oversee them. For whatever Pura's oversight is worth, Pura doesn't get to oversee them because they're a non-for-profit. So I think they fall like outside of that direct oversight. So creating that Bill of Rights and really kind of trying to drive home the fact that there's such inconsistencies between one water company and another that we can't ever budget a job properly because you never know what you're going to get. There's no consistency with RWA amongst its own departments. There's no consistency, with Aquarian and within its operation, and there has to be a set parameter that we get to play within. So when I go to make a land seller an offer, I know that I'm going to spend, $500,000, $600,000 on water main, and I can understand that that's going to be there between 5 to 10% instead of having a 50 or 30% swing in my water costs.
Any other comments? All right. So moving on, Senate Bill 1308, an act establishing starter home working group. So this almost happened on a lark. Bob and Kevin and I went to meet with the chairs of housing to talk about our priorities. And one of the chairs lamented about the lack of starter homes in the state of Connecticut. And said that she didn't want to think about it now because she's too busy thinking about just cause eviction and other landlord-tenant, legislation to put the screws to landlords. But I suggested that, why don't you put a working group together to talk about it? And she thought that was a great idea, and that's where this bill came from. So we'll testify in support of this bill and let them know, the issues pertaining to starter homes and our inability to build them and why. So next bill is House Bill 6888. This is an act concerning property tax abatements for first-time home buyers. This is not a mandate. It would give towns the option to create a property tax abatement program for first-time home buyers that can't exceed $500 per year for 5 years. So we'll certainly submit testimony in support of it. And then we're going to be in the thick of it here. House Bill 6889, an act concerning evictions for cause. We'll certainly be submitting testimony. This bill basically expands just cause eviction rights to anyone living in a mobile park or an apartment with 5 or more units who has occupied the unit for more than a year. It makes some exceptions. Basically, if the landlord wants to kick the tenant out, if he or she wants to move in, or if they want a relative to move in, they can do that. It gives the landlord the option to request proof of a tenant's protected status, and that evidence can include Social Security benefits, and it substitutes a doctor's letter for verification of a tenant status with language that would allow a medical professional or a social service agency or a counselor or a case manager or just a reliable third-party person who's in a position to know to be sufficient to be a evidence towards a individual status as a protected class. So and then it basically says a landlord with a building of 5 or more units must provide a revised notice to tenants about their new rights as prescribed by DOH. So we've fought against just cause in the past. I would encourage folks who are property owners on this call and in our association to either testify in person or submit testimony in opposition. But yeah, are there any questions about that?
Yeah, I just saw, Jim, that the Partnership for Strong Communities came out with their action alert, broadcasting it and encouraging people to submit testimony and show up at the hearing too. So
Yeah, yeah. So again, I should say for a lot of people who are like, hey, what's Partnership for Strong Communities doing? Aren't you guys a part of that organization? We're not. Partnership is a standalone organization. We are part of an organization called Home for Connecticut, which the partnership belongs to, in which we belong to, and there's quite often, some really thorough and strong and passionate arguments about landlord-tenant issues there. And we've always been, very vocal about our position about the negative impacts that some of their more onerous uh, pieces of legislation could have on landlords and housing production as a result. So yeah, they came out and there was another bill that I saw recently, or another organization that came out, the Housing Collective, also came out with a big, email blast asking folks to testify and submit testimony as well. So they're going to be out in droves, pushing their narrative, of course, and hopefully we have as many landlords and property owners as possible, pushing their narrative as well. We're certainly not going to win the numbers game here. Obviously there are a lot more tenants out there than landlords, and typically tenants have a lot more free time than landlords do. So I'm sure they'll pack the public hearing and basically be a cacophony of noise pertaining to landlord abuses. We'll do our real work after the public hearing on this one behind the scenes, as we always do. But certainly as much of a visual that we can provide to counteract the tenants, it would be good. So if anyone is on, that's not talking, if you can just mute yourselves, that'd be great. Any additional questions about Just Cause? All right, moving along. The House Bill 6890 is an act concerning the rental assistance program. This bill basically increases the effective duration of program certificates. It reduces the eligible unit inspection periods and requires program payments to landlords to begin within 10 days of the qualifications. And it provides for an electronic signature and electronic submission of forms option for landlords. So we'll certainly support this bill. And then there's House Bill 6891, an act prohibiting landlords from requiring security deposit in excess of 1 month's rent from any tenant. This change, basically, it changes the max security deposit from 2 months to 1 month for 1 month for anyone, not just for individuals over 62, which is the current law. We'll submit testimony in opposition to that as well.
Jim, I would just recommend that you also include something in there that is actually going to discourage landlords from taking a chance on a tenant that may be a little bit questionable. So I don't think it's really going to solve the problem they think it is.
Yep.
May actually even make it worse.
Right. We're fond of commenting on unintended consequences in our testimony. Yep. House Bill 6892, an act limiting the increase of rental charges upon transfer of residential property to a new owner. This bill requires the Fair Rent Commission to presume a fair rent violation if at transfer the rent increases more than 10% unless there's been major renovations. And major renovations is defined in statute as being pretty substantial. We'll oppose that bill as well. And then the next bill, House Bill 6938, an act increasing the number of rental assistance program certificates. This basically just says that DOH has to increase the RAP assistance by an unspecified amount by January 1st, 2026. So the amount is just left blank, and it's kind of a generic bill, but certainly we'll support it. House Bill 6939, an act authorizing state funding for the Right of Counsel program. So, as folks know, during the COVID years, they created a right of counsel program for tenants, and it was funded primarily with, I think, exclusively with federal dollars. This bill would basically change it, saying that it could be funded with state dollars as well as federal dollars. So the assumption here is I'll monitor this. I don't know if obviously it's a shitty bill, but right now I don't know if folks have a strong opinion as to whether or not we should just submit testimony in opposition to this one, or if we does it matter if it's state dollars or federal dollars that's going towards funding free legal advice for tenants? All right, if there are no comments, we'll keep an eye on this one. My guess, by the way, is even if it is, if it does allow for state funding, that, with the fiscal guardrails being as they are, and, the other priorities that the legislature has, I'd be surprised if there was significant amount of funding that was given by the state to this effort. So the next bill is House Bill 6940, an act establishing a working group to develop a uniform statutory definition of affordable housing. We'll keep an eye on this. It appears like what the goal here is basically to ultimately weaken 830G. In my mind, it's always hard to kind of oppose a working group. But I think that we'll keep a close eye on this one and see how that progresses.
Already have a uniform definition. They just don't like it.
You just don't like it, right?
Jim, just a quick question. We should probably keep an eye on how many working groups we have too. I think I just counted 1,432 after that last one you mentioned.
Yeah, right. Is that who's the legislator that used to get up on the House floor and say that this is working group 1,322? It's some old curmudgeon, I forget his name, but I think he's dead. But anyhow,
Jim,
I think it was
Tim
George
has-
Gunther, but
no, well, it was Gunther did it, and then like there was a guy that before him that did it as well. But George Gunther was a senator. There's a guy in the House that did it. Old guy, always had a cigar, blah blah blah. But I'm sorry, Bob, go ahead.
That's right. No, I think Tim makes a good point. If there's already a definition of it, I think we should point that out in our testimony, that there's really no reason to, not that we're opposing a working group, but why are we having a working group when there's already a definition? Have a discussion about not liking the definition if you want to.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. Then rather than monitor, I can, submit some basic testimony in that vein.
What is their issue with the definition of affordable housing?
I think they want it to be more inclusive and to include naturally occurring affordable housing would probably be my guess, so that they can include it towards their 10% threshold.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right, so the next bill is House Bill 6943, an act concerning protections for residential tenants. So it basically requires a landlord to provide a tenant an accounting of charges, payments, and balances owed. It requires a landlord to apply any rental payments to the current rent before it goes to arrearages. It prohibits a landlord from requiring a tenant to pay a surcharge for a month-to-month lease or holding over beyond the term of the lease. It also requires a landlord to provide written notice to a tenant that the tenant is entitled to file a complaint with the Fair Rent Commission if they don't like the rent increase. And it requires a landlord to provide a tenant with an application to register for voting. And it establishes an unfair trade practice if a landlord is marketing a lease that contains provisions that are contrary to state law. So we'll obviously oppose this. I was thinking to myself, if there was, this is probably a priority of the majority leaders. That's probably going to eventually get rolled into his omnibus bill. And I was wondering if there was anything we could really support here. But like if there was one provision we could support while you know railing against the rest, but I don't see anything that we would be comfortable supporting. Uh, so
Jim, if we have to let our tenants know they can go to the Fair Rent Commission, can we also let them know that we're going to have somebody that pays their bill for that attorney to protect them as well?
yeah,
They want
right.
that out of this bill.
Yeah, that'll be the next one, I'm sure. Yeah.
I don't think there's anything good here to
No,
support.
no. Yeah. So, all right. The next bill is House Bill 6944, and that's an act requiring a municipality to include certain information in its affordable housing plan. This is the new version of Fair Share. And we're actually slated to talk with Erin Boggs from the Open Community Alliance about her bill. In the past, there have been, I guess there's kind of a schism in our association, if you will, over this bill. Some supporting and some in opposition. I think that if you were to accurately poll folks geographically, that our friends in Fairfield would probably be less inclined to support this, whereas we might have some folks that feel like it's not a bad idea around here. But the bill basically mandates the completion of priority housing plans by high-end towns. The plan needs to be approved and certified by OPM, and within 12 months later, the town needs to show that its zoning conforms with the plan. It requires OPM to develop regulations for what makes an approvable plan. It also, basically says interested parties have the right to sue if they don't think the approved plans are adequate. And it then shifts the burden of proof to OPM to prove they are. It requires OPM to come up with housing estimations and allocations, and then by 12/15/2035, and it needs to update them and then update them every 10 years thereafter. And then it lets towns that aren't subject to the law create plans, and then if they do, they're allowed priority discretion funding, or discretionary funding, I should say. And then it directs DOH and CFHA to make grants available to towns and COGs to help with the planning process and the technical assistance. And they have to do that within available funding. Tim, am I missing anything there?
Oh, candidly, I'm one of the ones who has had a love-hate relationship with this particular bill, and I'll tell you exactly why. I had 6 weeks ago conversation with Erin and her colleagues about melding my proposals that I sent to DeGraw and Rojas with the fair share bill on the theory that the housing groups all get behind one bill that might have a better chance of passage. And I thought they agreed to that, and then this bill came out with none of my proposals in it. So anyway, that's just my nose out of joint. But I've said consistently now for 2 or 3 years that fair share is well intentioned and it's certainly on the right track. And there has been some limited success with fair share in New Jersey. But this bill, and I've told this to Erin over and over again, is highly prescriptive and has very it's very unclear. And I'll just read you these two little sections. Subsection C, any municipality in the highest 80% of net equalized per capita grand list income must create a municipal housing plan that creates a, quote, realistic opportunity for the development of the number of affordable housing units allocated to it by fair share. And here's the definition of realistic possibility. See if you can make head or tail of this. Realistic opportunity means the possibility for affordable housing to be constructed for the benefit of low-income households in a time frame and with administrative burdens while considering financial feasibility and applicable municipal rules, policies, and practices. I've told Aaron, how are you ever going to enforce that? There's so many factors in that one paragraph that it's just a mishmash, and there's no metric, that there's no accountability, there's no standard, there's no bright lines. Realistic opportunity means the possibility. That's
But
not
Tim,
that's not how you write legislation.
Yeah, I mean, but it does then allow for the promulgation of regs, right? To kind of
Oh yeah,
suss that all out.
that's a part I don't have any problem with, but it's just the core of it is so poorly defined, and I just think, Jim, you and I have shared the phrase OCA's proposal sometimes kind of suck the air out of the room.
Mhm.
If this gets adopted, and by the way, this is step one. Step two is next year when OPM and the consultant that the state hire come out with what's going to be the real fair share program. So this is an interim step, but I just think if this got adopted, the municipalities just say, okay, we don't need 83rd G or any other program now. We have fair share, and fair share won't go anywhere, and then we'll be kind of in a pickle. Other than that, I'm totally supportive.
Does anyone have any questions about this?
I do. Just
yeah.
Tim, do you think that there's anything that needs to catch up from your conversations, or do you think that this is really what Aaron's putting out there?
I posed that question to OCA this morning. I don't have an answer yet.
Okay, I'm thinking it hasn't caught up. I'm just playing a hunch here because
Yeah.
I've never seen that group agree to something and not live by that, because that's just inconsistent, I think. But please let us know what you hear.
I will.
Yeah, it could be that folks are being pragmatic, right?
I get that.
That the reality is everybody knows that this is the one bill that will get the loyal opposition in a lather, and it'll make for good public hearing and TV clips. But beyond that, the likelihood of this bill moving forward, particularly when you have a governor that says, he wants municipalities to lead the way, even though even though OCA is changing this the term to lead the way or whatever, it's not the case. And so I just think that maybe they have other plans for Tim's bills that might be more viable, hopefully, right?
Then when
So
when are we going to meet with Aaron? Is that coming up next week?
well, it's technically we're supposed to meet on the 12th, and that's the day of the hearing. So it's actually going to be the 18th, but it's actually going to be the 19th or 20th now. We're going to have to reschedule. So I guess the question is what do we do from our perspective? I would prefer either providing general comments about housing accessibility and affordability and trying to avoid any sort of legislation that increases litigation like this might appear to do, or just monitoring this bill, even better yet. But I don't think that we, Bob, could, in good faith, put testimony out there that supports the legislation, knowing that we have a silent faction of individuals from Fairfield County that would be strongly opposed to this, who probably aren't technically present here today.
Yeah, I think Aaron's going to get upset with us if we're not supportive of it, but I think maybe we come back to her and say, hey, we've got this list from Tim. None of it seems to have been incorporated into your bill. That's why we're just kind of staying silent on it. When you make the bill a little better, we could try to come out and support it. Something to that effect.
Yeah, that, and we've already lent our support to, the Live, Work, Ride effort. And so, you know, I guess there's nothing wrong with just saying we support all land use reform, you know, no matter how big or small. But there just are a lot of folks that are really concerned about what the allocations for each municipality would look like, and what that would do to the character of folks' communities, even though we're not supposed to talk about that anymore. It's obviously an underlying concern.
Hey, Jim, can I ask Kevin a quick question? Kevin, how are they going to reconcile those two bills? Fair share and ride, work, play, workout.
That's why we got to go through this whole process. I think to Jim's point, they're probably flushing out, you know, what's real, what's not. And then you have these omnibus bills in the House and the Senate. So we haven't even gotten to those. I think with Felipe, his idea is to have, like, Just Cause has its own vehicle, but he's going to have that in there. So all this stuff is going to probably be filtered into those two bills.
Yeah, and I've said this before, Greg, that I have on multiple occasions heard Eleni and others say how much they support Live, Work, Ride. I know Eleni's not driving the bus on this bill because it's in the housing, I believe, but you know, I've never heard Eleni, you know, internally or, you know, in private discussions remark how much she supports fair share, like she has with Live Work Ride.
Yeah, they
And I
don't
think
want
that's kind of telling.
the CCMs of the world.
So, Bob, I mean, can we say here that we'll be monitoring this bill and keeping an eye on it? I mean, we could always tell Aaron that, like, hey, we can work this bill behind the scenes if at some point we're supportive of it.
Yeah, I'm thinking that's the way we do it for right now, because I don't think we can support it as it's written. But I don't want to oppose it, obviously. Like you said, we want to support any kind of land use reform.
Okay. If everybody here is in relative agreement, then that's how we'll treat this bill. We'll monitor it for now. And I'm sure Aaron will be coming through the testimony looking for our testimony, and it won't be there, but it's better than us coming out in opposition. The next bill is House Bill 6945, and that's an act establishing a task force to study municipal penalties for landlords for health and safety violations. The bill basically establishes a task force, and just as the title states, I think they're looking for any other mechanism, you know, besides you know, civil penalties, to encourage repairs and bringing you know, units up to a habitable state, that apparently, obviously, there are municipalities where there are probably in our more urban areas where there are neglectful landlords, and they're just looking for different types of opportunities to stick it to those landlords if they can. It's a working group, so I'm just going to monitor it and you know, we'll let folks know if it changes in any way.
Yeah, is
The
this
next bill is
basically the same as 1305?
what's that?
It looks like 1305 and this are either exactly the same or very
Yeah, it's
similar.
probably just, you know, that they're just covering their bases with a House bill and a Senate bill.
Yeah. Okay. Joel, did you have a
So,
question?
Yeah, it's interesting that they want to have a task force to study that when we already have, at least in some towns, Bob, help me out here. Wallingford, for example, has certificates of compliance. And before a landlord could rent an apartment to a new tenant, they're supposed to have that apartment reviewed and correct anything of a health and safety issue. I don't think, in my opinion, you know, I would definitely monitor it, but certainly there's probably vehicles in place for this. It's just that most landlords probably just don't know what their obligations are. And we probably should just figure out a way to make sure that, especially if a property is changing hands and it's a new landlord, that that information is disseminated to them either prior to closing or at the closing table, and let them know that there's teeth in it. You know, if they rent an apartment that doesn't have that certificate of compliance. You know, it just seems silly that they're gonna have a task force for something that's probably already, you know, on the books.
Yeah, I think they probably already have the authority to do it, but like the city just don't have the manpower to do the inspections they're supposed to be doing, and they
Right.
wait till complaints come in, and then they want to just be able to find the landlord, let somebody else do all their work. It's kind of what I'm
Right.
thinking. I'm thinking this is more of an inner city type problem with, you know, derelict buildings and slumlords and that sort of thing.
Right.
Well, and that falls under, you know, the penalties for health and safety violations anyway.
Yeah.
But, you know, I know from, you know, closing on these properties that generally, if they're inspected, you know, and if I'm on the sell side of that, you know, I let the, you know, prospective landlord know that, hey, you guys have an obligation, this is what you got to do. And, you know, and do that inspection so that you're focused on safety and health violations so they can correct them before they start renting. Because generally what I do is I just, you know, put the fear of repercussions of, God forbid, there's some kind of fire or something there and you didn't have working smoke detectors, or your egress and ingresses were blocked, or whatever the case may be, and how that can affect them, you know, going down the road.
Yeah.
So anyway, it'd be interesting just to see if it is a work group, you know, what comes of it.
So if I were a guessing man, my assumption here is that if you know, civil penalties aren't doing it, or they're not cutting the mustard as far as this working group would, if that's the conclusion that they're coming to, that they're looking to, you know, determine whether or not, you know, criminal charges could be probably like brought against folks who are, you know, chronically derelict in their duties and creating a uninhabitable circumstance from a lack of, you know, repairs necessary for a tenant to enjoy, you know, have that quiet enjoyment of their unit. So that's my guess.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this was the bill. There was one I was reading when I was going through these this morning that allowed a lien to be placed on the property. And it sounded like it could even be placed in front of other liens based on a date or something, which sounded totally contrary to anything in law that I understand. They're always, the lien is dated when it happens. That's how it gets in line. So you might want to just check that, because we certainly don't want something to circumvent a problem with, you know, a mortgage or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, again, it's a working group, so I mean, the most they can do is
Yeah.
provide recommendations. So
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's this bill. I know there was one that allowed liens.
yeah, it's not this one.
Inspection bills. So,
so the next bill is House Bill 6946, an act concerning the annual report of housing authorities. This basically requires that each housing authority includes certain additional information in its annual report, and to post its annual report on its internet website. So I think any, you know, transparency or more disclosure on with regard to housing authorities is a good thing. So I'm sure we can provide some generic support there. The next bill is House Bill 6947, an act prohibiting residential rental property owners from using pricing algorithms and competitors' sensitive data to set rental prices. There was already a similar bill in general law that had a public hearing that we submitted testimony in opposition to, and we'll do the same here. House Bill 6948, an act concerning the collateral consequences of criminal records on housing authorities. You know, it basically says that you can't ask for a background check before a provisional offer, and that you can once you do provide a provisional offer to invite a potential tenant, then you can do your background check It allows for, you know, a look into someone's record at any time if it's with regard to murder, sex trafficking, sexually violent crimes, kidnapping or manslaughter with a gun, or second degree assault with a gun, and a couple others. But then it says if the conviction is 20 years or more, you can only ask about that conviction if it's 5 years within the individual's release from prison. Or that you can only apply, right, that conviction. And then there's the conviction of between 5 and 20 years. Then the rental application can only be affected if the release was within 3 years. And then for 5 years, it can only affect one's tenancy if they were released within 1 year of the rental application. So we'll submit testimony in opposition. We've seen versions of this bill in the past, and we've always opposed it, and we'll continue to oppose it. House Bill 6949, an act concerning a landlord's ability to enter a dwelling unit. It basically prohibits a tenant from refusing to allow a landlord to enter a tenant's dwelling unit for 6 or more consecutive days. Makes sense. We'll certainly support it. House Bill 6950 is an act concerning the income threshold for tenants renting a dwelling unit in a set-aside development. This basically says if a tenant, it makes an income beyond the threshold, that they're still allowed to stay within that unit for the preceding 3 years after becoming income ineligible. I think this is one that we just kind of monitor and keep an eye on. So we're out of the housing bills. And
Jim, I have one question on that one, and maybe Tim can clarify this, but there's an issue with that where you're keeping a unit that's a set-aside unit and putting a tenant in there for 3 additional years when they're not qualified for it. So you're excluding it from someone that needs a space. It also doesn't say, like, somebody that's going from a 60 in an 830G project from a 60 to an 80% unit or 80 to 100% unit. You don't get, it doesn't sound like the landlord's going to get to take advantage of that higher rent, even though they would, in theory, qualify for that additional rental rate. So it just doesn't seem right. I mean, I can understand you don't want to put somebody on the street, give them 6 months to figure out a new housing situation or something. And what I've done with my 830G project is allow them to stay in that unit, but they pay the going rent for what they're qualified for, whether that's increased to 80 or 100. And then the next available unit becomes the next 60% unit if the base unit was a 60. And that's, again, not to put somebody out on the street, but just to let somebody stay in for an extra 3 years just doesn't sound like what we're trying to do with all the affordable housing programs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just going from 60% AMI to 80% AMI could mean the landlord picking up $700-800 a month in additional rent. So, I don't see the public purpose in saving the tenant that money when they would easily, when they would say qualify at 80% of AMI or 100% of AMI.
I think you've all identified exactly the problems. The one I would add is if you know what the rules are when you move in,
Right.
your income goes over, you move out. And most of the affordability plans we draft, I give you 90 days to do so. That should be enough time.
kind of seems like a tough scenario, though, if somebody's income goes over by $500 or something like that, and all of a sudden they're out in the street, in a different predicament.
But all of a sudden they're out on the street. There's ample time frames built into it. It's not like somebody puts their suitcase at the curb.
But they could qualify if you move them up the ladder at 80%, 100%, or even 120% of AMI, qualify for that restricted rent, for those restricted rents.
Or just move into a market rate unit.
Right.
Yeah, the bare minimum, they should be at least contributing that extra money to some sort of a fund toward going towards affordable housing. Would seem fair.
Right.
I mean, we don't really want to get into monitoring that and collecting that money and setting it aside, but they're sort of getting a free ride for 3 years. That's a pretty sweet deal.
No.
It's kind of
So-
like another form of rent control, limited rent control.
All right, so moving on, we're now into the energy and technology public hearing, which is also on the 18th. They have a bill of interest to us, which is House Bill 6925, and that concerning the establishment of the Connecticut Home Energy Label and Training Program for energy efficiency auditors. So we've seen versions of this bill in the past, and some years we've opposed the bill. In other years we've remained silent on it. It's a bill that is disliked by the realtors, and I know the oil guys hate it as well. Basically, it allows or authorizes DEEP to create its own Connecticut Home Energy Label that scores efficiency consistent with national rating systems. It gives authority to towns to mandate labeling for sale or rental units. It authorizes towns with the ability to create civil penalties for offenders of not more than 500 for the first offense and then 1,000 for every offense thereafter. And it mandates the DEEP to create a training program by October 1st, 2026 for the licensing of energy efficiency auditors. So, I'm talking in the past with Chris Herb with the oil guys about this bill. They've always pointed out the fact that there are national energy auditing programs. Like, why does Katie Dykes from the DEEP need to create her own version? Because one could preclude from that she wants to do that because she wants to potentially maybe steer natural gas and oil out of the equation as best she can. And so, in the past, we've had some robust conversations about this where we've said, hey, why not allow for the labeling to occur? Because we as new home builders will have our product appear to be more marketable and enviable to be in than the older housing stock. The counter to that too, though, has been that labeling doesn't really work because the reality is what you're really monitoring is usage, right? So if you have a family of 5 in one unit and a family of 2 with no children in another unit, and the unit's the exact same, what you're going to see is higher usage in that family of 5 unit than the other. And so, what good is an energy label in that regard? So, I see Bob, you're coming off mute.
Yeah, well, a couple of thoughts. One is the new home construction isn't that big a problem because we're going through that process to get our houses code compliant anyway. If we're doing Energy Star or HERS rating or whatever. But one thing you just raised a point as you were saying that, I'm thinking, so I certify my home that it's going to cost $1,500 a year to operate. And somebody moves in there with 5 kids and they leave the door open, they take 15-minute showers and their energy cost is $2,500. I just see a lawsuit coming that says, hey, you told me it was going to be this, something's wrong here. That's one. On the existing home side, the problem is who's going to do the testing and inspections and evaluation to determine this, and who's going to pay for that testing and evaluation. At some point, somebody's going to have to write a check. We spent $1,500 to certify one of our homes for the inspections and the whole process. I'm going to think it's something similar to do an existing home. to have an
Well-
inspector come out and qualify your house and give you a label to stick on the electric panel or something. I just don't know how they do it.
Yeah, so Deep wants to obviously create an army of auditors to do it. So, but you're right. I presume that those audits do come with a cost, right?
Would they all work from home like they currently do?
Yeah, right.
I mean,
Go ahead.
I personally am all for making existing housing stock more efficient. And we have to bang that drum because we have to put an end to them putting the onus of energy efficiency on new construction. New construction is such a small percentage of the energy use in our state, and the existing housing stock is egregiously underperforming. So, you know, I'm all for there being a threshold level for a renovation, that they have to have an energy, you know, energy audit and a threshold that they have to achieve. But I believe that there's already federal guidelines for that, and I don't know why we need to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah.
We just need to require, you know, those projects to follow, you know, whatever those, you know, code related thresholds are.
Right. So this isn't this isn't you know, an energy audit at point of remodeling. This is like energy audits at point of rental or point of sale, right? So it's if we came out in support of this, we would be doing it you know, contrary to you know, what our friends the realtors would be advocating for, which is the complete opposite. We'd also you know, be stepping on the toes of our natural gas and oil friends as well. So I'm not saying
Would
that.
we though? I mean, NAR might be a little upset with us, but I don't think oil and natural gas would be, from the standpoint of, you know, I'm pretty excited if they say, you know what, EG Home's brand new house is 1,000 times more efficient than
Right.
that 1984 house that you're looking at,
Mhm.
and you're looking at them dollar for dollar, or wondering why mine's 10% more expensive, you know? So I have trouble saying I'm against some kind of threshold, even if it was a non-invasive label that they put on it. You know, if your house was built to this code standard, you know, the code in 1984 was, you know, whatever it is, the average home at that is this energy efficiency.
Mhm.
And they don't actually have to do an audit. They just have to say that house was built in this period and most likely has an efficiency coefficient of Y.
Yeah, use the stats instead of an actual audit, you know.
But just for a minute,
That
that
is-
house could have had all brand new windows, new heating system, re-insulated, on-demand water, you know, and it could, all the efficiency can go right up, you know? So I don't think it's fair to say because it was built in 84, and we already have,
But then it would be remodeled in, you know, 21, and it would fall under that.
right. Well, I did my house in 2015. I felt right under, if I waited to 2016, I would have different code requirements, right? So, and what I did in 2015, you guys would have been really proud of because it was gutted, all new insulation, you know, was put in, the best windows that I can get, you know, with the best efficiencies and all that. So I don't know how my house compares. I just know it's probably the most efficient house I've ever lived in my life, and the warmest one. But I think this is really a challenge in a lot of ways because we're you know, if somebody is going to be putting their house on the market, to get these labeling done, who's going to do it? You know, how long is it going to take? And sometimes people have to get their houses sold and move pretty quick. So I don't know, you know. I definitely know when I sell new construction, guys, that's the first thing I tout is the efficiency and why it's better to buy a brand new house. Even houses that were built 5 years ago, guys are building way more efficient today than 5 years ago, correct?
Absolutely.
Right. Right.
Yeah, and Matt, I agree 100% with what you're saying, and not a single thing I disagree with. One other thing, Jim, is this idea that you have to certify it for a renter. It's one thing if you're selling it, okay, I'm going to sell my house for $300,000 or $800,000, and I got to spend $1,500. You're going to spend that kind of same number to get an apartment certified, and you're going to rent it, and you're going to take like a month's rent off the table on your annual income just to get your certification done. It just sort of doesn't make sense.
Probably not the right vehicle for this dynamic.
Yeah, with resales, I mean, maybe I'm just being too simplistic, but here you go. Here's a year's worth of bills. I mean,
Yeah.
you show your energy bills. This is my year's worth of electric bills, a year's worth of gas bills, a year's worth of water bills.
And
That's a great point, George. That would be a very simple thing. We don't have to get a big certification. You just have to provide bills. If you could say if the tenant or purchaser or potential purchaser asks for them, you have to provide them.
Right.
And I think I've in the past years there has been legislation to that exact end. I guess it never passed because we wouldn't be here today, presumably. But I do remember seeing similar legislation in past years.
And we can CC Katie Dykes on it if you'd like to see him.
But it does seem like that's a lot more simplistic and more efficient approach, right? Just provide a year's worth of energy bills.
Yep.
So, I mean, that's what we could do is say like, hey, we like the idea of identifying, efficiencies of apartments and houses, but that we don't like the idea of, being intrusive during transactions of the extra costs associated with auditors that will just be passed on to consumers. And what we would like to see is something a lot more simplistic, like allowing for bills to be seen, at the request of the prospective tenant and or new homeowner. If everyone's okay with that, I'm happy to submit that sort of testimony.
Yeah, the only issue with rental is, depending upon how you're billing is if the tenant is paying their electric bills and their heating, I don't know how it's heated, but it pays the heating. You as the landlord don't necessarily have access to those bills. So on owner occupied homes, it's one thing, but on rentals, it might put a little bit of a issue there, unless they say that the utilities have to provide it.
But if it's part of the rent, then it really doesn't matter because they know what the cost is going to be.
And I should say there are exceptions in this bill for rental units that include utilities. So it's a stupid question, but when you're posting testimony, it's either you oppose, support, or general comments. So when I'm submitting this testimony, obviously it's going to be either oppose with amendments or oppose or support with amendments. But regardless, when you're submitting, it only shows as oppose, support, or general comments. So how do I submit this testimony? Am I submitting it as we're supporting it, and then in my testimony, I'm identifying that we support the concept with amendments, or do we oppose until amended? I'd be more inclined to say we oppose until amended.
I think so. We don't want to have the invasive. I mean, that just seems ridiculous. And we don't want that much. We don't want that many more state workers.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, you could say we're in opposition of this bill, but we support, I don't want to call it energy labeling, energy usage notification.
Yeah, upon request.
Yeah, upon request.
Okay.
As a simpler process. And you're also not getting into that thing where I'm not guaranteeing that the rate's 1,500. That's just what I paid last year.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I spent half the winter in Florida, but that's how much my utilities bill was.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not making any other commitment to you, so you can't come back and say, your usage was higher or lower than mine.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of
Okay.
takes you off the liability goes away, I think, in my mind.
All right. Good. Then that's how I'll submit. So the next bill here is a public safety bill, an act implementing the recommendations of the Department of Administrative Services regarding acting building officials, certain parking spaces, and elevator certificates of operation. So I know from reading this bill that we'd be supportive of the first section, but I definitely have questions about the remaining. The first section basically says if a building inspector is absent for 30 days, a town can appoint an acting building official. And I think we can all agree that that's a good thing. The other sections, though, it would basically state that requirements about the width of parking spaces, it basically tosses them out the window if the state building code eventually imposes greater width requirements to accommodate EV charging stations. So, I had no clue as to what to think about that and what concerns you guys would have. And then the elevator part was basically just says that the renewal of an elevator certificate is good for 2 years with a $240 fee. And then the new part was as long as the elevator is deemed fit and isn't subject to any outstanding violations. That seems fine. So it's really the parking provisions that I was scratching my head at.
Can you repeat those parking provisions?
Yeah, so here, I'll even pull up the actual bill here.
Jim, while you're doing that, I'm going to apologize. I know we were trying to get these things to an hour, a little over an hour now, and we've still got a pile of bills. I think we're going to run for another half hour. Hopefully you guys can hang in there, but I understand if you've got to bail out.
So it says in line 42, it says that the provisions regarding the total width and the width of cross hatch for parking spaces specified in paragraphs A and B shall not apply in the event a state building code imposes greater width requirements for such parking spaces in order to accommodate the presence of electric vehicle charging stations.
So they're implying that electric vehicle charging stations are wider,
Yeah.
and we have to
say, like,
plan for
in
that.
the event that this state building code is changed, that we'd have to accommodate for those wider spaces. Yeah. So that's kind of what I shrugged my shoulders at that one too.
On the first part, though, I think it should be 15 days, not 30 days for the building official being out. Because 30 days is a long time to go without an inspection. When I have a development, I probably get, 15 inspections a week.
Yeah. No, I like that idea. So I can just kind of leave my comments to that, and we'll keep an eye on the parking space stuff, but unless anyone else has any thoughts about that. So the next bill is Senate Bill 1294, and it's an act concerning the manner in which persons engaged in home improvements make certain disclosures. It basically says that if you're advertising, rather than having your registration, your home improvement registration on that advertisement, that you can have your website on that advertisement, and folks can go to your website to see your registration number. Seems like they're trying to help out home improvement contractors there, so we'll support that one. The Planning and Development Committee on the 19th has a couple of bills. Senate Bill 1313, an act increasing housing development within a 1/2 mile radius of public transit. Basically, it would allow 15 units per acre as of right within a 1/2 mile radius of a train station or a rapid bus station. Seems pretty simple, and my intention was to submit testimony in support. Senate Bill 1315, an act authorizing municipalities to enforce certain blight regulations without providing notice or an opportunity to remediate. This basically says, currently the statute says that the town isn't obligated to provide notice if there have already been more than 3 violations. This bill would just change that to 2 violations. Seems relatively reasonable, but I really don't think we necessarily have a dog in the fight, so I thought I'd just monitor that bill. Senate Bill 1317, an act concerning liens for violations of the housing code or public place ordinances. That bill specifies that any unpaid penalty for a housing code violation or a violation of a public place ordinance would constitute a lien upon the real estate which the penalty was imposed from on the date of such penalty. So I'm just going to monitor that one as well. Proposed House Bill 6424, an act concerning property tax abatement and payment in lieu of taxes for shopping malls converted to residential use. The bill basically establishes a property tax abatement for shopping malls that are converted to residential use, and it provides a pilot, so a payment in lieu of taxes, to reimburse municipalities resulting in that would result in lost property revenue. So I obviously helpful to developers looking to convert, so I'll support it. The next bill is 6534, an act concerning appointments to the Municipal Housing Authority. The bill basically gives towns, gives their governing bodies the ability to review and approve appointments before they're made to the Municipal Housing Authority. I think this is a good bill. You know, these municipal housing authorities can be populated by folks with, you know, that are preconceived biases, and maybe that might kind of be rooted out if it's it's first approved by a governing body of the town. So I figured I would lend support to that as well. The next bill is House Bill 6536, an act concerning regional councils of government and inland wetlands review and historic property maintenance. The bill basically requires that any development that needs the approval of an inland wetlands in multiple towns that are members of the same COG, that each town has to consult the COG before approving or denying any inland wetland application. And then it says each regional council of government has to hire a building and housing code official to inspect the conditions of historic buildings, and that such officials be empowered to utilize funds from the Community Development Block Grant Program and to facilitate the maintenance or repair of historic buildings. So, you know, I mean, obviously, I'm not sure how many developments occur where you guys are dealing with multiple inland wetland agencies, but then to have to go through, you know, the additional process of waiting for a COG stamp of approval, I imagine could be tedious and time consuming. So, you know, obviously there's potentially some concerns there. I don't know, Bob, if you have any thoughts about this one.
Yeah, I see Matt shaking his head. It's just, well, it's another approval that we need to get for a project that's on a property, you know, on a town line. No. I mean, I don't think they have any authority. They have no knowledge. You know, how is a COG going to even evaluate a project? What, you know, I don't even know what their process would be.
All right.
Who's going to ask Susan, what the hell is this? It's like,
All right. So then
Makes no sense.
Yeah, and I don't know if I even have a comment on the historical side. They should just pull these two pieces apart and have separate bills. I don't even know what that other one is if we care.
I mean,
think of what
anything with
project he
historical
has in mind.
society's got to stop, in my opinion.
It's true.
I just spent $40,000 recovering 6 freaking arrowheads from 6,000 years ago, and my consultant wants me to donate them to UConn or to the state, and I said, "Piss off! Give me my fucking arrowheads."
Save them for when you have competition you want to get rid of, Matt. Go throw them over on their property.
Exactly. I'm like, no, I get my arrowheads. If somebody wants to buy them off me, they can do that. But we got to put an end to this historical stuff because they've tied it into water discharge permits and it's killing all of us. So
Doesn't this seem like she has a project in mind? It just seems so obscure.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I
It does
mean,
sound like somebody had an issue someplace and
yeah.
Yeah,
they figured out how to fix that.
I was trying to figure out this is Susan Johnson, and she's over here, and I just wondered what she has in mind, because it's like she did something a couple of years ago about trying to change the preservation rules, and I know what she had in mind then, because certain people wanted to tear down a building. That's history, but so I don't know. It's just like it's one of those things. It's like addressing one particular issue.
Hmm. Well, then maybe they should do that rather than
Yeah,
make it broad-based like that.
As Bob says, how often would this ever come up?
Right. Yeah. Well, we'll submit testimony in opposition. The next bill is House Bill 6812, an act redefining inclusionary zoning. This is another one of those bills that's probably designed to weaken 830G. So I think we'll keep an eye on it, or I can make some general comments about the importance of 830G and the need to ensure that it stays intact.
Yeah, they're talking about like property being properly zoned, but that doesn't mean there are affordable units on it or anything. So there's something. This is another one that somebody's trying to get somewhere with it. So we just oppose it until they clarify what the hell it is.
All right.
Jim, just quick. So do we have a standard statement that we use to support 830G? Or should we do that? Tim could really help us with that as well. But we should have like almost boilerplate that goes into everything that's trying to close this down, just to keep it simple for you,
Yeah.
but also to make sure that we hit all the facts as many times as we can. It can be short too.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point, Greg, to just have the same kind of material submitted when it's anything that might kind of impact 830G in a negative way. Yeah, I'll draft something, and I don't know if Tim's still on the line, but maybe I can draft something and have Tim provide feedback.
Yeah, I like that. You can just say, it has an appearance that it's going to weaken 830G, and we're strong supporters of 830G as one of the few ways that we can provide affordable housing. Therefore, we have to oppose this bill. It could be very simple as that almost. But I like your idea, Greg. That's good.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. All right, so the next bill is House Bill 6962, an act establishing a task force to study the regulation of corporate housing acquisitions. And I think, as far as landlord tenant bills go, this is one that we can support and see what kind of conclusions they come to.
Actually, hang on, Jim. I'm not sure if I understood that. I don't think we want it. That's saying that you don't want the out-of-state guys to come in here.
Yeah, right. No, I mean, these are the out-of-state guys are the ones that are kind of going out,
Well,
giant hedge
Well, the
funds.
ones that they point to are the ones that are buying in the inner cities and maybe not taking care of the properties. Jeff Miller and I had a conversation once. There's a lot of really high quality, out of state, large investment firms that would come in here and aren't going to build the massive TOD projects that maybe we need and we don't have not even locally, we don't have in the state. Guys that can build a 500 unit project in Stanford or Bridgeport. But these out-of-state guys could come in and do those kind of projects, and we shouldn't be discouraging that, or buying some big major project that's really in bad shape, but they'll make the capital investment that's necessary. So, I mean, from a selfish standpoint, yeah, keep everybody out. I don't want any more licensed contractors. I don't want, anybody from out of state coming and trying to take work from us. But, if you're really trying to create more affordable housing or housing in general, we should be open and encouraging anyone that wants to make an investment in Connecticut to come here.
Right, that's right, Bob. There are a lot of publicly traded real estate investment trusts that focus on the apartment sector, and you don't want to keep them out They've got, capital that they bring with them, capital partner relationships. They've got lenders that focus on their business. They've got an excellent ESG record, good tenant relations. They're highly professional, and I don't think we want to mix them up with, the operators from Brooklyn, let's say, who come up and buy 3 and 4 family properties in Hartford and New Haven and run the existing tenants out. That would, I think, it'd be counterproductive if we're looking to produce a higher volume of units to solve the state's housing crisis.
Yeah, I haven't heard of them recently, but Avalon Bay used to be a huge builder of apartments throughout the state. And they built really high-end, high-quality projects.
Absolutely.
Toll Brothers has a division that's building rentals now. Why wouldn't we want Toll Brothers to come to town, come to the state and build a really high-quality property?
Right.
And
Equity
As long as they don't
residential
want to do it for
versus
sale
big
anymore,
apartment
that's
rate.
fine.
Yeah, how are you going to separate, those kind of developers from the fly-by-night guys that they're trying to get at? I just don't know how you do that. So I got a problem with us even having that conversation, even if it's
They're institutional real estate fund managers like Blackstone.
So what if it's out of state property managers versus out of state developers?
I don't think out of state is even applicable, really. I don't understand the out of state differentiation. Capital is fungible, and you want to draw as much capital into the state of Connecticut as possible to apply to the housing crisis.
I mean, there's obviously, from a lawyer's perspective, the issue pertaining to interstate commerce, right? So it's just like, how do you even?
Yeah, I mean, you want to keep out bad operators, whether they're in state or from out of state.
Yeah.
Goes back to the whole fact that the communities that are having these problems aren't enforcing the laws on their books. If they did the proper inspections and they did the things that they're supposed to do, there wouldn't be these problems. They're just looking at like an easy way for them to sit at their desk with their feet up and make sure these guys just don't show up and screw up their town. But quite honestly, they're already screwed up.
Right.
All right, then we'll oppose the bill then.
I mean, that's my opinion. I mean, you guys tell me if I'm wrong, but no, Jeff, like I said, you and I had this conversation recently. But I don't know if anybody else has a different opinion, but
I mean, there are all these institutional real estate managers in Boston. They're very interested in acquiring and improving, doing value-added improvements of B and C apartments in the state of Connecticut. They're also interested in doing ground-up developments, generally of 100 units or more. So we're talking about volume. They bring in capital partners that fund the equity in their JVs. I mean, why would we want to discourage those kind of players from, building thousands of units in the state of Connecticut?
Right. All right. We'll go ahead and oppose that legislation. The next bill is House Bill 6963, an act concerning the enforcement of requirements imposed by certain municipal approvals in the New Home Construction Guarantee Fund. So this is Eleni Kavros DeGraw's bill, and it's one that we worked on with her last year. This is, as a reminder, Eleni represents Avon and parts of Canton, has had some projects in her neck of the woods that were impacted by fraud and left undone. Her original goal was to take site plan and approvals and other approvals and get rid of the 14 to 19 year duration. We've kind of steered her away from that, even though this legislation still has some of that language in it. This was just kind of a placeholder because her LCO attorneys were stretched too thin, and she wanted to get the bill out there. She wants us to testify. She wants us to convey what we think can be done. And we've had some really good conversations with Eleni and with Hiram Peck, who is the town planner from that neck of the woods. And, really what we were all in agreement to was basically keeping the permit approval deadlines intact, but then expanding the ability for municipalities to access the home guarantee fund where there are concerns pertaining to health and safety violations, where they could actually, interject on behalf of the homeowner to fix those sort of landscape drainage kind of issues. Because as you know, if you're an individual homeowner, you can only access the fund if there is a defect to your actual dwelling unit. But you don't have access to the fund in instances where, because of fraud or what have you, that there might be some health and safety issues in and around your community that are left unchecked. So Hiram seemed happy with that kind of compromise. Eleni's happy with it, and so Bob and or I will be testifying, with comments supporting her efforts.
Yeah, Jim, do you have all the information that we've already presented to Eleni on what we want changed in this bill the way it's written now?
Yeah, I mean, we never really, I never really put pen to paper on it yet, but I can go back to my notes from our conversations, and maybe not give her specific language.
I know we're supportive of the concept. We just need to work on this bill language right now. Still needs some work.
Yeah, right.
So, all right, you and I have to talk about this, and if you're going to testify in person, if I need to plan to be up there, that's next Wednesday, the 19th.
Yeah, it would be great to have you there for that. This one is, yes, the 19th.
Yeah, it looks like they're gonna have a lot of stuff on their agenda. I don't know how many are controversial, but that could be a long public hearing process. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we can testify in person or remotely, Bob.
We could do it remotely or maybe just submit written testimony. I don't know. She may want to see us there though. I don't know.
Right. Oh, I bet she'd appreciate, that sort of FaceTime with us, whether it's remote or in person.
Okay.
Jim, just quick, the point that we talked about, when you have a public hearing with many bills and we're still under that time limit, we like to keep everything concise and together. But by having two of you, you'll be able to get more airtime for the total package.
Right. Well, if we're to testify together, there'd still be 3 minutes, but Elaine
you don't
certainly
get
ask
3
us questions.
separate minutes?
Yeah, no, you're still only allowed the 3 minutes if you testify together, but there's the assumption that, when they see a couple of folks sitting at the table and it's a bill that we're supporting that happens to be the chair's bill, then odds are, we'll get as much time as we want to have that conversation back and forth.
Even if Bob wears like a big nose and mustache combo, like you think they'll.
I have that on all the time. What are you talking about?
Yeah. So, all right. So moving on, we're wrapping up here. Let's see. We're now into labor. The proposed House Bill 5704 is an act creating a construction pipeline program. So this is a bill that, it's only a proposed bill, but from my understanding, they're going to use the language that I drafted for Tim. And this is going to be, or is, the House Republican Caucus's priority bill, or one of their priority bills. It not only addresses the ratio reform efforts that we are seeing in other committees, but this will also, seek pre-apprenticeship funding for pre-apprenticeship programs. It will create a better tax incentive for the construction apprenticeship tax credit. It'll change it from, I think it's at 4,000 now to 7,500, and then it will expand who can access those tax credits from corporations to also pass through entities. And it'll also create a working group, an ongoing working group that is intended to be populated by folks from our industry, from licensed trades, from community colleges, and from schools to talk about cross-mapping programs like the HBI Core Pack curriculum with four-year apprenticeship programs and potentially stacking that with associate's degrees and eventually a bachelor's degree in construction management. So good stuff. And, I was happy to be a part of it, happy to continue to be a part of it. This, again, is just one bill, but it's the House Republican caucus's bill and one that I'll obviously testify in person over, and I'm sure it'd be great to have written testimony submitted by our friends in the association. The next bill is Senate Bill 1206, an act establishing a pilot program to train additional women to work in the building trades. We'll clearly support that bill. And finally, there is House Bill 6955. It's an act concerning the liability of a contractor for unpaid wages owed to employee of a subcontractor for performance of labor on a construction contract. And so this is more commonly referred to as the wage theft bill. We've seen it a couple of years in a row. Last year, it actually passed out of committee, the Labor Committee, and out of the Senate. But we had a pretty good backstop in the House. They're obviously probably a little emboldened by the fact that they got it out of the Senate this year. And the interesting thing is that this is a House bill, so they're going to try to work their magic in the House, understanding that they probably most likely already have the support in the Senate. I think they have a tough road to hoe on this one in the House, and I think there are a lot of folks, particularly the moderate caucuses that are just offended by the prospect of this bill. And so while we have a lot of folks that support our position, it's important that we weigh in on this and explain how bad it is for our industry and for labor, et cetera. And this bill actually, it's a bill that's national in scope. It's, we've seen, headways. I think Delaware passed a wage theft bill just last year. And I know from my colleagues across the country that this is a bill that's popping up everywhere, and they're having to beat it back. I know Rhode Island is dealing with it right now. Colorado's dealing with it right now. And those are the few off the top of my head that I can recall. But
is this important enough that we get our members involved with voter voice? This just sounds like I mean, it's as bad as it was last year, and it was terrible last year, and it's no different now. We have to shut this thing down. This is just terrible policy.
Yeah, I mean, we'll encourage folks to submit testimony, and if and when this comes up for a vote in labor, which it will, we'll use voter voice to ask to mobilize our members to ask their legislators to oppose it, and then obviously, if and when it gets to the House floor, we can do that all over again.
Good. Bill, Jim, there's two other bills. One I think you skipped over. I think it's on my third sheet, 6967. Unless I fell asleep for a minute in this meeting after an hour and a half. I don't think we covered that one. Assignment of post-loss homeowners and commercial property insurance benefits and home improvement contractors and salespeople. Did we discuss that, or did we jump over that, or is it off your list? Because it might have been on your earlier. I'm looking at a couple of different versions of your
What's the bill
list.
number, Bob?
6967. I'm looking at two different lists from you, so I just make sure we just didn't miss it.
Yeah, so an act concerning the assignment of post-loss homeowners and commercial property insurance benefits. And yeah, thank you, Bob. This is a big one. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, I thought it was. That's why I didn't.
So this is a bill that we've seen on multiple occasions as well. It's the insurance industry has tried passing this bill on multiple occasions. I think they would commonly refer to it as the storm chaser bill. But unfortunately, it doesn't just affect out-of-state remodelers. It affects our entire remodeler community. It basically, establishes a process for the assignment of post-loss benefits under the homeowners and commercial property insurance policies. It modifies the required terms of home improvement contracts. It precludes homeowner improvement contractors from engaging in certain efforts to induce owners to enter into home improvement contracts. It requires home improvement contractors to notify the commissioner when they have business name changes or address changes or anything like that. It requires the home improvement contractors to maintain additional insurance. It expands the required content of the application for a certificate of registration as a home improvement contractor. Modifies the grounds on which the Commissioner of Consumer Protection can punish home improvement contractors or salespersons for home improvement contractors. And it also specifies when the commissioner can revoke, suspend, or refuse to renew a certificate of registration. Like I said, I've already have canned testimony on this from previous years. There are certain things here that we can support, but a vast majority of it we can't. I've gone through this bill in previous years, line by line, with folks like Alan Hanbury, and certainly it's an ugly bill. One that I'm hopeful that, like, certainly I'll testify, and I've testified in person on this in the past. I'll testify in person on this one if it doesn't conflict with other hearings. But I'm hopeful that maybe our Remodelers Council folks can also submit testimony in opposition, and come and support or submit testimony in person if they can as well. But this is an ugly bill. I kind of thought, Carrie Wood, who's a pretty good pro-business type of legislator, got the message last year, but apparently she didn't. Obviously it's not our committee of cognizance, the insurance committee, and the IAC, the Insurance Association of Connecticut, has a hard on for this bill. So they've been, pushing it for a long time. And my guess is that, Carrie is doing it as a favor to them. But, Kevin, that we should, if we can kind of get an opportunity to get some FaceTime with Carrie on this one, it'd be a good idea.
Great.
All right, thanks, Jim. One last question. I don't know if you talked to Sheila earlier. I think she got off the phone now, but she had called me this morning about Bill 1236. Is about solar licensing exemptions. She had a member, solar installer, that was concerned that it required licensing for all the preparation and preliminary work of setting solar panels. But I read it as there was an exemption for those kind of activities when installing solar panels. So maybe you could just take a look at that if you haven't already spoken to Sheila, and just make sure that I'm reading it correctly.
Yeah, no, I did talk to Sheila briefly about it. I don't know, do we have anybody here from the solar community with us? I know that she said that there'd be some folks joining
I
us.
thought there was somebody on earlier, but he got off.
Yeah, I think they got off. I know that Jake and Sam Schneider were gonna try and get on the call to talk about it.
Sorry, Eric, I probably should have brought it up early so they didn't have to spend an hour and a half waiting for this final bill to be discussed.
Yeah,
I will jump in as well. This is just another example of trying to grab work where work doesn't need to be grabbed. I mean, this is not skilled labor. This is a regular laborer can put solar panels on a roof, and they do have electricians, but not everybody on that roof needs to be an electrician. The state talks out one side of their mouth, they want more solar, want more energy efficiency, and then out the other side, but we only want,
And Matt, just
union
so you
labor to do
understand,
it.
I need Jim to just take a look at this because I read this bill as being, there was an exemption of a bunch of things that you don't need to be licensed for. And they've added this solar panel installation process as an exemption from the licensing is how I'm seeing it. So I think it's protecting them, not saying you have to be licensed. But Jim, I just want you to read it to make sure I just haven't missed this.
Yeah,
Well,
no, I'll reread it, but I think it's the opposite, Bob. Just, I
Yeah.
mean, I
So
think
if
it's,
if they're requiring you to be licensed just to do the prep, I mean, even like if they're ground mounted, you have to, put piles in or concrete work or ground screws in, that's got to be done by a licensed electrician. I don't know an electrician that would even want to touch that kind of work.
right.
Electricians were pissed when they made them do the conduit for
Yeah, exactly.
for developments. They're like,
Yeah.
we don't want to do that.
Yeah,
Right.
they're not.
And it seems like it's probably got labor behind it too, just with the, and
does have labor
tying
behind
into the ratios.
All right.
So if
if you
you
look
get
at
a chance, look at the testimony files. That'll give you
Yeah.
a clear picture, Bob.
Yeah,
Okay.
and if you look at the testimony, which I did earlier, it
Okay.
really is like all union folks in support and
All right.
everybody else in opposition.
All right. So obviously we need to put that on our list and oppose that
Mm.
pretty vehemently.
Yeah,
It's just a
well,
labor grab.
Yeah, yeah. So I think it's actually has a public hearing or had a public hearing this morning. So we can still submit testimony after the fact, though.
Okay. That's all I've got, Jim.
That's all I got. And thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. It was a long day with a lot of freaking bills right now. We're in the heat of it right now. And so thank you for all those of you that hung in for the whole day. And sorry,
Anyone's
Greg, I
looking for me to
apologize to
be
you.
drafting testimony for the next 3 days.
Yeah. All right,
Jim,
Jim,
have a
I'll send
long
you something
weekend.
on those solar panels.
let us know what we need to do to help, and I'll talk to you, I'm sure, between now and testimony time next week.
All right, sounds good. Thanks,
All
everybody.
right, everybody, have a
So long,
good weekend.
everybody.
Yeah.